you're watching A News. Let's see the main headlines. Details of the new US-Iran ceasefire agreement are expected to be released in the coming days. G7 leaders in France hold high-level talks involving the United States, Ukraine and Gulf states. And the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, meets US Congressman Abraham Hamadeh in Baku. Details of the newly signed ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran are expected to be released in the coming days, ahead of a formal signing in Switzerland on Friday. The deal would reportedly extend the current truce and outline steps on sanctions relief, energy flows, and a wider de-escalation framework.
The United States and Iran are expected to publish details of a new ceasefire agreement in the coming days, with a formal signing in Switzerland on Friday. The Memorandum of Understanding, signed this week but not yet made public, extends the current ceasefire by another 60 days. The reported 14-point agreement commits both sides to ending hostilities on all fronts. It also avoids new sanctions or military buildups. Under the framework, Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz to oil tankers and commercial shipping within 30 days. In turn, the United States would lift restrictions on Iranian ports and allow Iran to resume oil exports. Already there have been signs of loosening up of the Strait of Hormuz. At least 2 large oil tankers, run by state-owned National Iranian Tanker Company, reportedly moved past a US naval blockade on Wednesday, the first shipment in nearly 2 months. They are carrying around 3.8 million barrels of crude oil. The deal reaffirms Iran's pledge not to develop nuclear weapons, which has been confirmed by US President Donald Trump. However, discussions on Tehran's wider nuclear program will continue. Iran has maintained that its nuclear activities are for peaceful purposes. Officials from both sides say the deal could bring major economic benefits to Iran, including sanctions relief and access to frozen foreign assets. It also proposes a $300 billion fund, backed by Gulf states, to help Iran recover from war damage and losses, provided Tehran complies with the agreement. However, questions remain over Israel's role. US Vice President J.D. Vance said the agreement includes Israel and Lebanon, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel is not bound by the deal. Hezbollah has also warned that a lasting truce would be difficult unless Israel withdraws from southern Lebanon. The conflict has killed more than 7,000 people across the region, mainly in Iran and Lebanon. Meanwhile, oil prices fell to their lowest level in 3 months, as hopes grew that the agreement could ease tensions and improve stability across the Middle East.
Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran is prepared for all scenarios in the long-standing conflict with the US. Both countries are seeking to avoid escalating tension before they sign their peace agreement, slated for Friday in Switzerland. Taraz Shireliliu reports from Tehran.
Hosting on the social media platform X, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian said that the final deal with the US has not been achieved, stressing that Tehran is ready for all scenarios to serve its national interests. He added that as Iran prepares for all options, the country has learned from its leaders not to be humiliated. In the latest development following the ceasefire deal announced on Monday, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke by phone with Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi. According to official sources, they discussed the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the US, as well as bilateral issues. Oman has been one of the key mediators, hosting indirect talks, as well as facilitating exchange of messages between Tehran and Washington. Meanwhile, the governor of Iran's central bank has announced that there are clauses in the peace agreement that ensure the unblocking of Iran's frozen funds. The semi-official Tasnim news agency quoted Abdul Nasser Hemmati as saying that factors were considered in deciding the provisions related to the release of assets. The bank's chief added that efforts have been made to ensure that the mechanisms in the agreement provide highest possible level of certainty for access to these financial resources. During the mediated ceasefire talks, Iran demanded the release of its funds, reportedly estimated at around $60 billion, that have been locked in countries including China, India, Japan, Qatar, South Korea, the UAE, and the US. Hemeti is currently in Russia to develop monetary and banking ties in the wake of Western sanctions against Tehran and Moscow. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting from downtown Tehran, for A News.
In the last 5 hours, at least 4 people were killed and several others injured in Israeli drone strikes in southern Lebanon. That's according to Lebanon's national news agency. Despite a temporary peace agreement between the US and Iran, fighting between Israel and Hezbollah continues. The Israeli military said it had struck a Hezbollah rocket launcher and targeted a suspicious vehicle near its troops. Lebanese authorities say more than 3,820 people have been killed and around 1.2 million displaced since the conflict escalated. US President Donald Trump has criticised Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over Israel's attacks on Lebanon, saying he must act more responsibly. Speaking at the G7 summit in France, he also said he was unhappy with Israel's handling of its military campaign.
We had a great relationship. We're talking about some end details. I didn't like that he did an attack based on there's a very minor little thing with some drones that were released, and he ends up doing I saw that attack. I saw where that bomb went. Did you see what happened? That was a vicious, that was too much. Now, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran.
Turning to southern Gaza now, and witnesses say Israeli forces are expanding the areas they control, known as the Yellow Zone. These include eastern Khan Yunis and northern Rafah, where new markers and concrete blocks have been placed. On Sunday, Israeli tanks entered the Al-Tufa neighbourhood in northern Gaza City. Several families had to leave their homes. Reuters footage showed yellow blocks placed closer to houses. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the army should expand control over Gaza from 60 to 70%. Israel and Hamas have not agreed on the next stage of the US plan. The United States and Iran are expected to sign a peace agreement on Friday in Switzerland, marking what could become one of the most significant diplomatic developments in the region. Joining me now is Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat, joining us from Rabat, Morocco. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, if signed as expected, how important would this agreement be in the broader history of US-Iran relations?
Well, let's hope that this is an improvement in comparison to the JCPOA that was promoted by President Obama, the European Union, Germany, France, the UK, and Italy, which was probably the base and the cause itself of the present conflict, because the deal was closed in a very flimsy way. It created the terms and conditions for Iran not to abide by the rules of the JCPOA, to develop their nuclear program beyond what is considered safe and reasonable for civilian purposes, that is enrichment beyond 6%, and definitely their very aggressive missile program. So there are 3 or 4 elements in this agreement that have been left for the 60-day negotiation, and that is going to be an extremely delicate matter, because we are seeing some announcements that are a little troubling, if you don't mind me saying. First, let us not forget the 3 reasons or the 3 conditions that the United States put on the table in Geneva on February 27th, and the negative, the very firm opposition of the Iranian regime to abide by any of these three conditions was the cause of the initiation of the war the following day. Let us remember which conditions were requirements were imposed by the United States. First, to stop promoting and defending, financing, using, and indoctrinating their proxies in the region. Second, to renounce uranium enrichment beyond 6%. And third, it was to stop their mid and long range missile programs. None of these objectives have been met, and on top of that, there was the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz. If by any chance the Iranian regime managed to impose some kind of toll to the ships that are crossing the Strait of Hormuz, because they could do it very much in secrecy. They could negotiate all of these things in third countries through agencies, and they would have access to a phenomenal amount of revenue that is far greater than anything comparable to what they have today in terms of oil and gas revenue. We're talking about $100 billion to $200 billion. The unfreezing of assets before the Iranians actually abide by anything that has been agreed in this memorandum of understanding, and after that, the negotiations in the 60-day technical period that will start as of Friday, are extremely worrying. Also, there has been a Reuters report that says that the United States is willing to establish a $300 billion fund to reconstruct and rebuild Iran. It needs to be said that that fund cannot be in the hands of the Iranian regime, because they will not do any good use of it, and most probably they will detour those funds for purposes other than the reconstruction of their country or the well-being of their people, and most likely to finance terror and their proxies in the region. Now, I am very optimistic about the end of the war, but we need to be extremely cautious about the shortcomings of the agreement, or any kind of, let's call it, fumbling or time gaining strategy on the part of the Iranian regime.
Okay. And Ambassador, let's have a look at the timing here. It comes at a time with ongoing tensions involving Israel and Lebanon and Hezbollah. How connected are these issues from Washington's perspective?
Well, Washington has understood that of course, Lebanon as a whole cannot be held hostage by Iran or Hezbollah. But at the same time, the Israeli attacks need to be precisely targeting Hezbollah and not any kind of civilian neighborhood or provoking or causing civilian casualties, collateral casualties in Lebanon. Of course, the Iranians are using a completely flawed argument, saying that this is an Iranian defense of Lebanon, when it's in fact an Iranian defense of Hezbollah. Actually, they're contradictory. The defense of Lebanon is exactly the opposite of defending Hezbollah. Hezbollah is right now the greatest problem of Lebanon, and not the defenders or linked to the well-being and security of Lebanon in any way. Hezbollah is the single greatest menace to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Lebanese Republic. But the attacks of Israel need to be completely focused and targeted on Hezbollah, not on Lebanon as a whole. And if by any chance the United States manage to impose on the Iranian side that they force Hezbollah to cease their attacks on Israel, the Israelis need to stop their attacks in Lebanon.
Now, Trump's publicly criticised Israel's approach to Lebanon, and this is rather unusual. We don't hear this kind of direct criticism from Trump toward Netanyahu. What do you make of that?
Well, I've said it in this show several times before, and I think that we were the first to say it in international media, because we had a very direct source that told us about the huge deal of irritation of President Trump towards Prime Minister Netanyahu. In one of his many visits to Washington, it appears that Prime Minister Netanyahu told a small group of journalists and friends that he actually had President Trump in the back of his in the back pocket of his pants, and that came to the attention of the entourage of the president and the president himself, and it outraged them. It outraged the president, and he was extremely harsh from then on with Prime Minister Netanyahu. One of the consequences of this, as you might recall, was that after the inexplicable attack of the Israelis against Doha, with the excuse of attacking a member of Hamas. Of course, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but the only reason why Hamas was in Doha, and not anymore, by the way, is because the United States asked them for that. And it's because other countries in the region begged them to keep those channels open, including with the Taliban. And there are even very credible sources that say that the Israelis themselves asked the Qataris to keep those channels open. So the attack against Doha was completely inexplicable and unacceptable. And President Trump forced Prime Minister Netanyahu to excuse himself and to explain himself in front of the Prime Minister of Qatar. And now this situation has deteriorated several times. As you know, there has been a very clear leak from the White House expressing the very harsh terms of a call between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu in recent days, when he said that you are a lunatic and you are not in jail thanks to me, and things of this sort. And it was an official leak. It came directly from the White House. So we know that the relation between the leaders is not good. But we must never underestimate the very strong links of friendship and alliance and partnership between the State of Israel and the United States of America. So just to conclude this part, yes, the relation between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu is extremely deteriorated and very tense at present moments. And I just hope that the Israeli establishment as a whole, and not only this government, understands that trying to restrain the Iranians through the negotiations of these 60 days is essential. But again, they are perfectly right, and I must underline this, perfectly right in being fearful and weary of the results of the negotiation, because in 47 years of existence of this regime, never once a negotiation has concluded in a positive way due to the dilatory and the lies and the derailing strategies that the regime has practiced throughout these 47 years. There are some very tricky questions here that need to be seriously addressed in these 60 days in front of us, and these 60 days are going to be crucial to know if this was just a very short period of no peace, no war, or the beginning of real peace.
Ambassador Aristegui, that's all we have time for. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your analysis.
My pleasure. All the best.
We'll continue with the main stories of the day after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching A News. President Ilham Aliyev has received US Congressman Abraham Hamadeh in Baku. Their talks focusing on Azerbaijan-US relations, strategic partnership and regional connectivity. President Aliyev says Azerbaijan-US relations have strengthened in recent months, citing the Strategic Partnership Charter and high-level contacts. The talks highlighted the Congressman's co-sponsorship of a bill to repeal Section 907, as well as a stronger dialogue with the US Congress and cooperation in trade, energy, security, connectivity and technology. The meeting also covered the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process and the trip corridor's role in boosting regional transport links. Russian attacks have killed at least 4 people in Ukraine's east and southeast, with damage reported across several cities. The latest strikes came as both sides reported overnight drone activity far from the front lines.
A series of Russian attacks on Ukraine overnight killed at least 4 people and wounded more than a dozen others, according to Ukrainian officials. Regional authorities of Zaporizhzhia said waves of Russian drones struck the city, killing 1 person in a car and injuring 7 others. A residential building and a shopping centre caught fire, while an educational institution was also damaged.
You can't move around the city freely. This is already, you see, my second time. The first time I was caught in the blast myself. I was on my way to work. And the second time it was with my family. You can't just calmly go out to the store.
In this case, what's happening now is simply genocide against our people, intimidation and things like that.
Officials said Zaporizhzhia was struck 5 times during the attack. Further east in the Donetsk region, prosecutors said Russian bomb attacks on Sloviansk killed 3 people and injured 5 others. The city is part of Ukraine's heavily fortified defensive belt and remains a key target in Russia's slow advance through the region. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry said its air defenses destroyed 157 Ukrainian drones overnight over several Russian regions and the Black Sea. Ukraine's military also reported continuing heavy Russian losses, saying Moscow allegedly has lost more than 1.38 million troops since the start of its full-scale invasion in 2022.
A Russian warship fired warning shots near a British yacht in the English Channel on Tuesday. It happened after the vessel sailed close to the frigate Admiral Grigorovich. The incident happened south of the Isle of Wight, where Russian authorities said the yacht ignored repeated warnings and continued on what they described as a dangerous course. Moscow said signal rockets and a warning shot were used to prevent a possible collision after the yacht came within 150 metres of the warship. No injuries or damage were reported, and the yacht continued its journey after being checked by personnel from a Royal Navy patrol vessel. Global tensions and shifting alliances are shaping discussions at the G7 summit in Evian, where world leaders are focusing on some of the most pressing international conflicts. High-level talks involving the United States, Ukraine and Gulf states have taken centre stage, alongside broader economic and technological issues. Our next report brings you the latest from the summit.
The war between the US and Iran and the war between Russia and Ukraine formed the main bulk of the discussions here in Evian on Tuesday for day 2 of the G7 Leaders Summit. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the US President Donald Trump sat down for one-on-one talks about the conflict. The Ukrainian leader urging his US counterpart to put more pressure on Russia, forcing President Putin to come to the negotiating table. That's the hope from Kiev. And in fact, Donald Trump did say that he would be reimposing certain sanctions on Russian oil shipments. And Donald Trump also said that he believed the US-Iran issue was disappearing into the, quote, rearview mirror, so he could spend more time refocusing back on trying to solve the war between Russia and Ukraine. Regarding the situation between the US and Iran and this memorandum of understanding that's due to be signed in Switzerland on Friday, Gulf leaders were also invited to Evian on Tuesday, and there were chances for them to have one-on-one sit-downs with Donald Trump, the leaders of Qatar, the UAE and Egypt, being able to further scrutinise the deal between Tehran and Washington, the impact on their region and the post-conflict situation regarding the Strait of Hormuz, which Donald Trump says it will be completely open from Friday. On Wednesday, the final day of the G7 summit, the focus will look at global GDP. The French president, the host leader here, leading a charge to try to ensure that there is a more equitable sharing of global economic growth. And there will also be a session on the safety and deployment of artificial intelligence. Ross Cullen, A News in Evian.
NATO is set to strengthen its air and missile defence posture in the eastern Mediterranean, with Italy deploying a SAMP-T system to central Turkey. The move comes as the alliance seeks to adapt to evolving security challenges across NATO's southeastern flank. Here are the details.
An Italian SAMP-T air defence system will be deployed in the Turkish province of Konya as part of NATO's defence planning process. The announcement was made by the Turkish Defence Ministry, which says the goal is to enhance NATO's defence capabilities in the eastern Mediterranean region. Officials described the move as part of routine alliance coordination among NATO allies. The SAMP-T system is one of Europe's most advanced ground-based air defence platforms. It's designed to intercept aircraft, cruise missiles, and various types of ballistic missile threats. The system was jointly developed by France and Italy and has become a key component of NATO's integrated air and missile defense architecture. Konya province already plays a significant role within the alliance. Located in central Turkey, it's home to important military facilities and regularly serves as a venue for multinational NATO exercises involving allied air forces. The latest deployment comes at a time of mounting security concerns for NATO, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Middle East. In recent years, NATO has stepped up efforts to strengthen its deterrence measures and ensure the defense of Allied territory against evolving missile and aerial threats. Turkey fields NATO's second-largest military and occupies a strategic position on the alliance's southeastern flank, serving as a critical bridge between Europe, the Middle East, and the Black Sea region. The announcement comes only weeks before NATO leaders are set to gather in Ankara for a landmark summit in early July. The Defense Ministry, meanwhile, did not specify how long the Italian system would remain in Turkey. But officials say the development reflects ongoing Allied cooperation and NATO's continued commitment to collective defense and security. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkey has warned Russia against taking actions that could threaten Turkish interests in the Black Sea, emphasising the continuing strategic importance of the region amid ongoing geopolitical tensions. Now, the warning was delivered during talks in Moscow between Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. It highlights the complex relationship between Ankara and Moscow, which combines cooperation in some areas with competition in others. And the Black Sea remains a critical arena for regional security, trade, energy transit and military activity, making developments there significant not only for the countries directly involved, but also for the wider region. Let's bring in our guest now, Tolga Bilener, PhD, Director of Galatasaray University Centre for Strategic Research, joining us from Istanbul, Turkey. Tolga, welcome to the programme.
Hello, have a nice day.
Now, when Turkish officials speak about protecting their interests in the Black Sea, what specific concerns are they likely referring to?
Of course, the Black Sea region is a priority for Turkish security, and the Turkish part is in fact pursuing a very old diplomatic tradition vis-à-vis Russia. Cooperation when possible, deterrence when necessary. And that's what's going on right now in Moscow and in Tatarstan today.
Now, Turkey has managed a unique balancing act, as you very well pointed out, throughout recent years, maintaining dialogue with both Russia and Ukraine. How difficult is that position becoming?
It's more and more difficult, but it's also very precious, because in 3 weeks there is a NATO summit in Turkey. It's the first time since 2004 that NATO heads of states and governments will gather in Ankara. And in a moment when there are important questions about the credibility of the NATO deterrence because of President Donald Trump's behavior. So it will be a landmark meeting. In this context, Turkey, of course, when it talks to the Russian authorities. They know that they are a member of NATO, and the Russians also know that Turkey is a NATO member. So Turkey is not a neutral country in this context, but it maintains a position of active neutrality since the beginning of the Ukraine war. For example, Turkey provided military material to the Ukrainians, strictly applied the Montreux Convention on the regime of the Straits since 2022, and more interestingly, and probably it's going unnoticed for many, Turkey is also allowing the Greek Patriarchate in Istanbul to have a very strong relationship with the Ukrainian church authorities. And this is not only political, it's a wider geopolitical game that's going on. And in the meantime, Turkey was able to maintain a dialogue with Russia. As you mentioned, we cooperate and compete simultaneously, and not only in the Black Sea region, also in the South Caucasus, in Syria, even in Libya.
So what message then, Tolga, do you think Ankara wanted to send through Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan's discussions with Lavrov?
Of course, it's always better to have a dialogue than not to have a dialogue at all. And at the presidential level, but also at the ministerial level, the two countries are talking to each other in every occasion. Lastly, you know, Lavrov has been in the Antalya Diplomacy Summit in April. And there is also a cooperation dialogue plan that's been declared. So regular contacts are being maintained. In this particular context, what Ankara is trying to say that it is ready to play an important role of mediation between different parties. You know that President Zelensky has also a very good relationship with the Turkish president. So Turkey has the confidence of all parties to engage in a mediation effort, because we hope that the issue in Iran is now behind us. And the US President Donald Trump himself said he will now concentrate on the Ukrainian issue. So Turkey is willing to play a mediation role to put an end to this very complicated conflict.
And the Montreux Convention continues to play a critical role, as you touched on earlier, in regulating naval access to the Black Sea. How important has it been in shaping Turkey's approach?
Since 2022, Turkey has, of course, played its role of the guardian of the Turkish Straits, the Black Sea Straits, as the Russians call those. Of course, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles are one of the most important geopolitical places in the world. We saw recently what happened around the Hormuz Strait, and the discussions are still going on. This year, in 2026, we'll celebrate the 19th anniversary of the Montreux Convention, which proves how important international law is to regulate the freedom of navigation and connectivity. So Turkey is, of course, paying attention to keep this convention alive. And it is not only on Turkey's interest, it's also on the interest of all countries around the Black Sea region.
Now, you mentioned this earlier as well. As a NATO member, Turkey has certain security obligations, yet it also maintains important bilateral ties with Russia. How does Ankara reconcile those competing realities?
As I said earlier, Turkey, when it's speaking to the Russians, Turkey is well aware that it's a NATO member, and the Russians also know that. But we have to maintain a dialogue with this neighbor, as we are also cooperating in many different issues. I can mention the nuclear plant project. I can also mention tourism, and economic relations are thriving as well. And there, in some cases, the two countries are on the both both on the same page, because it is in our interest to have, for example, a more predictable South Caucasus, a more predictable Middle East. So Turkey is trying to manage and navigate in this complicated situation, and sometimes it is also pressured by its Western partners. We remember, for example, France has been very critical vis-à-vis Turkey when Ankara didn't apply the sanctions against Russia at the beginning of the war. But it is also precious for the Western world to have an ally like Turkey capable to talk to every player involved.
Tolga, one final question. Do you think we'll see increasing competition for influence in the Black Sea, or are regional actors still trying to preserve a degree of strategic stability here?
All actors are trying to have, of course, their interest, national interests respected, and the common interest is to have a predictable Black Sea. And thanks to the Montreux Convention, that we have also already a legal framework for that. But it will all depend on the final outcome of the war in Ukraine. We don't know yet what kind of Ukraine we'll have in a couple of weeks. Will there be border changes or not, for example? And what will be the status of the Crimea? Because for Turkey, Crimea is also of crucial importance, not because strategically, but also because of the Crimean Tatar population there. So we have historical connection to this part of Ukraine. So it will all depend on the negotiations to finalize the ongoing war in Ukraine, and that's because Turkey is willing to play a mediation role to be able to also have a say in the future of the Black Sea region.
Tolga, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you so much for your analysis today.
Thank you very much.
A significant milestone has been reached in trade relations between the EU and the US. However, a number of disagreements between the two sides remain unresolved. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, as the European Parliament approves legislation implementing the EU side of a trade deal with the US. This clears a major hurdle in efforts to avoid a new transatlantic tariff dispute. The agreement stems from a framework deal struck last year between the bloc and US President Donald Trump. Under its terms, the EU will remove tariffs on many US industrial goods and maintain duty-free access for products such as American lobster. In return, the U.S. will keep tariffs of 15% on most European exports. The vote follows months of delays and pressure from Washington. Trump warned that tariffs on European goods could rise sharply if the EU failed to implement its commitments by July 4th. Well, with Parliament's approval secured, Brussels is now on track to meet that deadline. Supporters say the deal provides much-needed certainty after years of tariff threats and trade tensions, but many lawmakers question whether Washington will fully honor its commitments. The European Parliament therefore insisted on safeguards allowing the EU to suspend concessions if the U.S. breaches the deal. The vote also comes amid fresh tensions between Washington and Paris. Trump threatens 100% tariffs on French wine and champagne over France's digital tax on U.S. tech giants. Macron refuses to back down, underscoring the broader disputes that continue to simmer beneath the trade truce. While Tuesday's vote lowers the immediate risk of a tariff escalation, key disputes over digital taxes, industrial subsidies, metals trade, and environmental regulations remain unresolved. The legislation also includes a sunset clause that would see the arrangement expire at the end of 2029 unless renewed. The deal still requires final approval from EU member states, but it does mark a major step towards stabilizing the world's largest bilateral trade and investment relationship. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
China has lodged a strong protest against the United Kingdom over its latest sanctions package for Russia. It targets several Chinese companies on allegations of supplying goods to Russia. Beijing says the move has no basis in international law. It's urging London to immediately stop unjustly targeting Chinese enterprises. Mahnur Maktoum has the latest from Beijing.
China has firmly rejected the United Kingdom's decision to add several Chinese entities to its latest Russia-related sanctions list. It's calling the move groundless and a violation of international law. The Chinese embassy in London said in a statement that the sanctions lack any authorization from the UN Security Council and accused Britain of acting unilaterally and outside the bounds of international rules. The embassy reiterated that China has consistently taken an objective and fair position on the Ukraine issue, saying it has never provided lethal weapons to any party in the conflict. The statement also said that Britain's use of so-called long-arm jurisdiction to sanction Chinese companies is unreasonable and violates their legitimate rights and interests. Beijing called on London to immediately revoke the sanctions and stop exploiting China-related issues to serve its own political agenda. The embassy in London added that China will take all necessary measures to firmly defend the lawful rights and interests of Chinese enterprises. The sanctions are part of a wider UK package announced this week, which also expanded restrictions on Russian individuals, vessels, and entities from several other countries, as London casts a wider net since the start of the war. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Violence in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo continues to worsen the humanitarian situation. The United Nations warns that ongoing clashes and population displacement are increasing the risk of the Ebola spreading further.
Where humanitarian colleagues tell us that escalating violence in the east of the country continues to take a heavy toll on civilians, constraining aid operations and complicating our efforts to contain Ebola outbreak. In the province of North Kivu, clashes over the weekend in the territories of Walikale and Masisi forced hundreds of families to flee. On June 13th, at least 3 civilians were killed and 5 injured during shelling in the towns of Munda and Buhimba. That's what local authorities are telling us. Essential services, including health and schools, remain disrupted as a result of the ongoing violence. Meanwhile, in the province of South Kivu, our humanitarian colleagues note that hostilities continued through yesterday with airstrikes, with shelling and gunfire reported in populated areas in the territories of Fizi, Uvira, and Kalehe. This has further disrupted humanitarian access and left more people without any assistance. Ongoing clashes resulting displacement risks are increasing the risk of transmission of Ebola, particularly as people move to and from affected provinces. Our partners are ready to respond but are constrained by poor access. As of June 14th, health authorities reported 21 new confirmed cases, bringing the total of 808 cases across Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. Despite the challenges, we, along with our humanitarian partners, continue to support national authorities in containing the outbreak through patient care, strengthened surveillance, prevention measures, risk communication, providing safe and dignified burials. We urgently reiterate our call on all parties to protect civilians and to ensure safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access.
And to a sports story, from packed stadiums to watch parties thousands of miles away, the opening days of the 2026 FIFA World Cup have brought celebrations, heartbreak, and plenty of passion from supporters. Here's more.
Football fans around the world celebrated the start of the 2026 FIFA World Cup with cheering, chanting, and waving flags, while others were left disappointed by opening match defeats. Earlier this week, Norway supporters gathered in Boston ahead of their country's first World Cup appearance in 28 years. Their celebrations continued as Norway defeated Iraq 4-1 in their opening Group 1 match. Norwegian fans cheered and sang outside the stadium after the victory, while Iraqi supporters back home praised their team's strength in the face of defeat. France also made a winning start, beating Senegal 3-1. French fans celebrated and chanted after their team's victory. Senegal supporters expressed disappointment but remained confident their side could still progress from the group stage. Argentina fans enjoyed one of the tournament's standout moments, as Lionel Messi scored a hat-trick in a 3-0 win over Algeria. Supporters cheered and danced in Kansas City. while fans in Buenos Aires jumped for joy as the defending champions began their title defense in style.
Like I say, everything I'm experiencing right now is amazing. I was lucky enough to achieve all my dreams, or even more than I could have hoped for, both individually and as part of a team. Today I'm enjoying all of this, having a wonderful team, feeling good, and being lucky enough to enjoy it on the field just the way I've always liked. Honestly, everything I've experienced is far more than I could have ever imagined when I was a kid.
Algeria supporters had earlier created a lively atmosphere before kickoff, waving flares, beating drums, and chanting in the streets. But their team were unable to stop the reigning world champions. Elsewhere, Austria celebrated their return to the World Cup with a 3-1 victory over tournament debutants Jordan. Looking ahead, World Cup action continues, with one of the most anticipated upcoming fixtures seeing Argentina face Austria on Monday. France will take on Iraq, while Norway meets Senegal in another crucial Group 1 clash.
After the break, we'll continue with the main stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has met with Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu in Moscow as part of his working visit to Russia. According to Turkish Foreign Ministry sources, the two discussed regional and international issues. Fidan is also expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to a Kremlin foreign policy aide. Tashkent has stepped forward as a centre of investment diplomacy. This week, leaders, investors and representatives from major international financial institutions are gathering for the 5th Tashkent International Investment Forum. This year, it has brought together more than 8,000 guests, half of them coming in from 100 countries, including heads of state, prime ministers and development banks. A correspondent has more.
Tashkent is putting itself on the global financial map in a big way. This year's International Investment Forum has brought together more than 8,300 participants, the most since the forum started 5 years ago. This year, the forum hopes to exceed $30 billion in investment and trade agreements that were made last year. Addressing the forum's plenary session, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev outlined 6 priorities for the country's next stage of economic development, from strengthening investor protections and expanding capital markets, to attracting investment into strategic industries, green energy, artificial intelligence, transport connectivity and urban development. The President also announced new initiatives, including the creation of the Tashkent International Financial Center, plans to issue sovereign Islamic bonds, and the expansion of privatization programs. It also has plans to attract greater investment into critical minerals, renewable energy, digital technologies, and major infrastructure projects.
The legal framework of the centre will be enshrined in a constitutional law. An attractive tax system will be created for the centre's participants. Profit tax, value-added tax, property tax and customs duties will be set at 0%. The free movement of capital and the ability to conduct settlements in any currency will be fully guaranteed.
The forum's significance was reinforced by unprecedented level of political participation.
A sign of this is the growing international interest in Uzbekistan as a reliable and promising partner. That is why the Tashkent International Investment Forum attracts more representatives of governments, business circles and international financial institutions every year. Azerbaijan, in turn, also views such initiatives as an important tool for strengthening international investment cooperation.
The discussions come as Uzbekistan continues to post strong economic indicators. The country has attracted more than $150 billion in foreign investment in recent years. The economy expanded by over 7.5% last year, while investment inflows reached $43 billion. International reserves now exceed $70 billion, and Uzbekistan's GDP is expected to surpass $180 billion this year. It is Sivir Hojab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
Kazakhstan plans to introduce a partial ban on wheat imports for 6 months. The draft proposal was published by the Agriculture Ministry. The decision was approved at a government meeting on the 5th of June. The date the ban will take effect has not yet been announced. The restrictions will not apply to wheat transported by rail for poultry and flour milling companies. State-owned food agencies and licensed grain storage facilities will also be exempt. The ban will not affect wheat shipments transiting through Kazakhstan. Russia is currently the only country exporting wheat to the country. According to industry data, Kazakhstan imports between 1.5 and 3 million tonnes of grain from Russia each year. Kazakhstan is set to gain access to port infrastructure on the Strait of Hormuz under a new agreement with Iran. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Iran has completed the approval process for allocating a land plot to Kazakhstan at the Shahid Rajai port in Bandar Abbas, located on the Strait of Hormuz. The announcement followed talks between Kazakhstan's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of National Economy, Serik Shumangarin, and Iran's Minister of Roads and Urban Development, Farzaneh Sadek. Once the remaining procedures are completed, the site will be transferred to the Kazakh site. The ministers discussed transport routes and port infrastructure. Iran also confirmed its readiness to provide Kazakhstan with opportunities at the Chabahar port, which offers access to markets in South and Southeast Asia. According to Iran, the Zahedan-Chabahar railway is more than 90% complete. It's expected to become operational in the coming months, connecting the port to a rail network linking the Indian Ocean, Central Asia and Europe. Kazakhstan also said it's ready to consider giving Iranian companies access to port facilities and terminals in Aktau and Kuruk on the Caspian Sea. The ministers also discussed the international north-south transport corridor. Freight volumes along the route rose by 12% last year to 3.5 million tons, while rail cargo traffic between Kazakhstan and Iran increased by 69%. Shumangarin proposed a joint roadmap to modernize transport infrastructure, which could raise the corridor's capacity to 20 million tons annually. Trade between the two countries also continues to grow. Bilateral trade rose by 26.4% last year to $430.2 million. Kazakhstan and Iran say they aim to increase that figure to $3 billion under the existing roadmap and the free trade agreement between Iran and the Eurasian Economic Union. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.